All right, are you guys ready for 14.3? This one I think should be pretty easy. All we're going to be doing is talking about units. So if you've had any confusion about standard units versus metric units, that's what we're going to talk about today. So in the United States, we use standard units, which is, and if you look on 14.3 in the workbook, so I'm looking at this, okay, you'll see standard units over here, metric units over here, and it's showing you that the standard units are inch, foot, yard, and mile, which we've talked about. And then we talked about how if it's an inch this way, an inch this way, an inch this way, and an inch this way, it forms a square, and it's a square inch. It's a square in every direction. Or it's a square mile, or it's a square foot. So we've talked about that. Remember we talked about tile? And we said that tile would be measured with a square unit. Because, now, quite honestly, it could be a strip of tile. But if we're thinking about the big tiles, they're always in a square. And so we're always thinking about how much space will be covered with the entire square. And I think that that makes sense because we're usually talking about covering a floor, right? Or covering a wall if maybe it was a shower. So it makes sense that we want to know how much does that entire square cover, okay? And how many squares do we need to cover the whole thing? Okay, so we can be measuring in an inch, which would be linear, okay? Or we could be measuring in a square inch that tells us that it's the entire square space, okay? Or we can look at the metric units of measurement. So Europe frequently uses metric. And quite honestly, a lot of parts of the world except the United States use metric. So it really is a good idea to become familiar with metric. Remember I told you my trick for I use this part of my finger to remember an inch. And your part wouldn't be quite the same because my finger's bigger. And this isn't a perfect inch, but it's close enough that I can estimate. Well, it would be good for you to figure out something to remember how big a centimeter is. And I'm trying to see, I tried to have everything I needed right here in front of me. Now I'm looking for a measuring tape and I don't think I have one. But if you found like maybe it's about the size of your finger from one side to the other side, I don't know, I'd have to look. But it would be good to have something that you can think of as how big is 1 centimeter, okay? Or there's a meter, or there's a kilometer or kilometer, okay? For our purposes in 3rd grade, we might be using those as measurements. What's important is that you just keep your measurements the same. You couldn't start measuring something with inches and then, you know, like if it says this side is 4 inches and this side is 5 inches, your answer can't be in centimeters, okay? So for our purposes, we're gonna remember that we need to stay consistent with our measurements. And maybe we'll do some kind of math experiment where we figure out what is something we can measure around the house that is centimeters and what's something we could measure around the house that is inches. You know, maybe we could do something like that. But for right now, we're not going to worry about it. Okay. So let's look at the part that says count how many square units this figure covers. And it's right underneath the customary units of measure. Okay. So boys and girls, we could go through. So I'm looking right here. We could go through and count those shaded in squares, okay? It's kind of like, you know, we could do repeated addition, but it's easier when we realize that we could be doing multiplication. So yes, we could count those, but they've given us a better way by giving us the 2 on the side and the 5 on the other side. Because if I know that there's 5 across, and I know that there's 2 rows of 5 across, okay, then I know it's 2 times 5. And it's much easier for me to say 2 times 5, this is 10 square units. Now, if there was some reason that I was unsure about my answer, I could always go back and check my answer by counting the squares. But let's try and get away from counting the squares. Remember when we were talking about multiplication strategies and we said, yes, you could use, for instance, an array to figure out certain multiplication problems, but Mrs. Kling and I have tried to give you better strategies to figure out harder problems because an array can be really tricky, right? It's the same thing here. Yes, you could count the boxes, but it's a harder way to do it and it's easier to make mistakes. So if we can remember that we can multiply, and if it works, because if we get a really funky shape, it doesn't work like that. So for now, while we've got nice straight shapes, let's just go ahead and use the multiplying, okay? Okay, so this area of the figure is, and I'm still right here, is 10, and then I want you to look at the unit because you have to include the unit. I was looking at your perimeter tests last night, which weren't fabulous, I'm sorry to tell you. So we'll talk about that later, but a lot of you forgot to put in your units. So for instance, if you look at that first example, it's 2 miles by 5 miles. So the answer isn't 10, it's 10 miles. You have to put in your unit. Because if we're talking 10 inches, that's a lot different than talking about 10 miles, right? So in the real world, it matters if you're talking about inches, feet, miles, kilometers, meters, whatever you're talking about, okay? Okay, let's look at the second example right there. Okay, count how many square units this figure covers. Which unit are we using? Well, I see a 2 meters and a 5 meters, so we're obviously using meters. So my answer is going to be 10, which we already figured out, but it's going to be 10 meters, or you could write 10 square meters, okay? Got to remember those units. Okay, so for number 1, I actually wrote it out. Nope, not that way, hang on. Okay, I wrote it out right here, okay? So this is your number 1, okay? Now again, it tells us that we've got 7 here. I can count and see that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, okay? And then it tells me I've got 7 5 times. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, okay? The directions here, and this is why I want to show this to you, the directions here say for 1 through 3, count the square units. You guys, I don't want us to get into a habit of counting something when we've got more sophisticated strategies than that, okay? So instead of counting, what I'd like to see, especially since there's 2 lines, it's perfect. I'd like to see you put in that multiplication problem, okay? So, sorry, is that a little tipped? Oh, it sure is. Well, that's just gonna be the way it is, sorry. Okay, so what I'd like to see is 5, and you can put this in, at this point it doesn't matter, I just need it with the answer, times 7, okay? 7 of them 5 times, 5 of them 7 times, however you want to think of it, okay? Now what is 5 times 7? That's an easy one, you can just count by 5s, is 35. So then let's put our answer down here. Area equals 35, 35 what? Kilometers. You're going to notice the squares don't look any different because kilometers and inches are just as different as inches and feet. They're a much different measurement. But you'll say, but Mrs. Mandeville, these squares look exactly the same whether they're inches or kilometers. That's because they're just squares on a paper. And that's okay with us. Like I said, we're just sticking with the consistency of if it's kilometers up here, it's kilometers down here. Okay? Okay, so now I want to look at this. All right, so we just did this one. So we said 5 times 7 equals 35. So our answer is 35 kilometers. Okay? All right, let's look at the next one. Okay? I'm not going to count this because it's telling me that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 of these in a column, and there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns. It's telling me that. I'm going to believe them. I don't need to count these, okay? If it's a nice shape with these nice straight lines, then let's believe them, okay? P.S. boys and girls, I want to show you, I was noticing something with your perimeter tests. Excuse me. Notice how nicely this is drawn. So if the directions were draw a box whose perimeter is, whose sides are 6 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, 8 feet. Do you notice how they didn't just go like, wah, 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 wah. Do you notice how they really used these little boxes? I notice on your perimeter test that some of you, like for instance, if you had all of these lines like this, you went through to draw your shape and you were like not even bothering to use the lines. You know, like see how this went in between? If you have the lines there, and if it was like draw a square that is 2 by 2, you have to draw right, no, see that didn't work out well. You have to draw right on those lines, like that, okay? You can't just flop it in there like, oh yeah, there's my box, Mrs. Mandeville. You've got to use the grid, okay? So that's just a little side note. All right, let me figure out how to erase this. Okay, there we go. Okay, should we change to blue? I think we should. Okay, so we're going to do 6 8 times, okay? Because this has 6 squares, and it's not just one time, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. So 6 times 8. Remember Mr. Mac's little rhyme for 6 times 8? Now I can't remember it. Ben, I know you know it. I ate 6 and something about throwing up on the floor. I don't know. Maybe Ben will email it all out to us. I remember this little rhyme. 6 times 8 is 48. Okay, am I done? No. I have to put in my answer, 48 feet. Sorry, I'm using my finger and I can't get it on the line. Okay, we good? Okay, do this one. Jacob, it's raining.
And
You're gonna go out in the rain?
how much?
Okay, so this one is going to be 8 times 8 equals 64. Okay, now if you didn't know 8 times 8, I wanted you to use one of your strategies to figure out what it was. Probably shouldn't have given you that answer so quick, but I don't just want 64. 64 what? Inches. Okay? Okay, now for this next one, number 4, use grid paper to show how to find the area of a garden that measures 6 feet by 4 feet. Okay, so I'm sure that you were irritated with me yesterday when I gave you that work, and in fact it was this, and it said right here to use grid paper. Sorry about that. So what I did was Mrs. Kling sent me this file with grid paper that she uses. And in fact, isn't this what you used for her game that was like Tetris? I think it is. So I sent this to your parents and I told them anytime you need grid paper, you can go ahead and print it. And if for some reason your printer is being a stinker, if you really had to, your parents could just draw it out. It doesn't have to be perfect. You could even get a piece of loose leaf, which already has the horizontal lines, and just go in and put in some straight lines. I'm not going to be picky. Do the best you can. But at least you'll have this. I emailed it to your parents, and they can print it anytime you need it. Okay? So let's go back to that question. On grid paper, show how to find the area of a garden that measures 6 feet by 4 feet. So I'm hoping in your mind you're thinking, oh yeah, that's easy, no problem. Let me get a marker. Oh, okay. So if it's 6 feet by 4 feet, Now we need to practice exactly what I was talking about, where you don't just go ahead and just draw in anything you want. You need to use these lines. It's 6 feet by 4 feet. Okay? So I'm going to go 6. Now, of course, it doesn't matter. Do I go 6 this way? Sure. Do I go 6 this way? It doesn't matter because of the commutative property, remember? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, go back to my question. Use grid paper to show how to find the area of a garden that measures 6 feet by 4 feet. Okay, 6 feet, 4 feet. Okay, if I can do the length times the width to figure out the area, then I can do 6 times 4, so the area equals 24 feet. Okay? So I'm hoping that when you saw that, you were like, oh, well, this is easy. They gave me the 2 measurements. All I have to do is, you may not have even felt like you needed to draw it. Hopefully, some of you were starting to think, oh, well, gosh, area equals length times width, so it's 6 times 4. Okay? But it's always good to draw it out. And it did say use grid paper. So in the beginning, we're going to just do what it says. Okay? Okay. I'm hoping that you're thinking, yeah, Mrs. Mandeville, I got this. This is good. What I'd like you to do is work on the P side, okay? At the top, I'd like you to do the same thing that we just did. Instead of just counting these square units, I'd like you to put in what multiplication equation could you use, and then what's your answer with units, okay? Down here it says use the diagram of the bulletin board for 4 through 6. So here's the bulletin board. Okay, what we have is Sue's photo, Allie's photo, Tom's photo, and Nan's photo. Okay, what is the area of each student's photo? So I'm going to write Sue, 532. Allie, 269. Tom, 423. Nan, 4. Okay, so I want the area of each one. And actually, it could be like Sue, A equals blah, 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 because the A stands for area. Okay? Now, it's giving you this little bit of information here. 1 square equals 1 square inch. So what are all of your units going to be? Squares. Inches. Not squares, inches. Okay, number 5. What is the area of Sue's photo and Tom's photo? And. Okay? You know what to do? Colleen's photo is 9 inches long and 7 inches wide. Is Colleen on here? No, she is not. Could you draw her maybe like right here? Of course you could. Colleen's photo is 9 inches long, 7 inches wide. Is it larger or smaller than Allie's photo? Explain how you know. Don't let your math guy freak out about explain how you know. Right now in your brain, what are you thinking about? As you think about this, you figure out the area. You compare this area to Allie's area, which you wrote up here. Which one's larger? How do you know? Just tell me what you're thinking. Okay? Tell your math guy to relax. Just tell me, yes, it's larger. No, it's not. I know that because blah, blah, blah. Okay? All righty.